friends are since.
Minibay. This is the Minibay. It is a desktop patchbay unit that has been designed not just to allow you to more easily connect up all your different bits and pieces of gear, but also to let you do so in a box that is really quite toty, wee and compact, and most importantly, probably portable. I did a video not too long ago talking about the general usefulness of patchbays for different kinds of setups, but in that video I mostly referred to kind of standard rack mount patchbay units, and that's because, well, they're a standard, right? There hasn't really been an alternative up until fairly recently, but for most people, or at least for a lot of people, having a rack case isn't really something they want or particularly need. They might just have a few different bits and pieces like Volcas or drum machines in their house that they like to experiment with in a, you know, kind of doll-less fashion, or maybe they want to play live with different standalone units. And whilst they would benefit from having a patch bay, having a rack case would be overkill, and that, my friends, is the gap in the market that the Minibay, I believe anyway, is probably most certainly aiming to fill. Up until now, there haven't really been solutions for this kind of use case. The only thing I can think of at the moment, and in my extended racking of brain, has been the Patchulator from Board Brain Music. That was a kind of nice wee, actually really cool looking device that allowed you, and was primarily designed, I guess, to change the signal flow between different guitar effects pedals. So if you wanted to put your delay before your reverb, or your reverb into your microcosm and see what happened, or whatever it might be, that's what that was designed for. And either way, the Minibay kind of takes that a step further. It evolves that idea and kind of gives it additional arms and legs. The Minibay has been created by a company called DF Audio, which I believe actually is just a guy called Dudley Faz. But he got in touch with me and asked if this would be something that I'd be interested in taking a look at. And I told him, yes, Dudley, yes it would be. Because unbeknownst to him, I have actually been looking for something like this exactly for quite a while. And so I am more than happy to share it with you and give it, hopefully, maybe a slightly wider audience and explain the kind of things you can do with it. The general idea of the Minibay is that you connect up all of your inputs and outputs on the rear. That is done via stereo TRS jack. And then if you want to change the signal flow, you do so using the minijack patch bay on the top, and that just uses the standard kind of mono minijack Euro rack cable connections that you can find, you know, anywhere you buy kind of modular stuff. The connections on the rear are stereo TRS jack to save space. So each TRS jack on the rear corresponds to two separate channels. So A1 and A2 are both on a single jack, which means you do need TRS insert cables or something like that. However, that is how they've managed to keep everything nice and small. So whilst it can be a bit of a complication, the upside is probably worth it, I guess. Now you can normal the connections as well. The way you do this is by opening the unit up, and there's a wee dip switch piano selector thing for each individual channel. So that means that if you want, say, the synth or whatever instrument you're inputting onto channel A1 to always normally be connected to the output on B1, for example, let's say an interface or mixer input or whatever it might be, then that's how you would do it. And that means that you wouldn't have to physically kind of connect the two things together using the mini patch bay. If you don't really know what I'm talking about, Jorb has got a really good video where he talks about all that kind of patch bay setup in much more detail, so I would encourage you to go and watch that if my detailed explanation is not good enough for you. Now, to give you some practical examples of how this might be useful, the first practical kind of, you know, scenario I can give you is, let's say I've sat down and I'm going to write a new smash hit single, and I'm going to do so with, of course, just a hardware only setup. So I've got some nice analog synthesizers going into my different inputs, playing different kind of elements of an arrangement, and they are all going into different inputs on my mixer or my interface or whatever it might be. At that stage, let's say that I want to experiment and try out different hardware effects units. So I've got a nice expensive reverb, or, you know, a cheap ass chorus pedal, or a delay effect, whatever it might be. If I'm not sure what arrangement or what instrument I want to go through what effect, then it actually can be quite difficult to experiment in that way with hardware, because you would have to physically change the connections between the effects units and the instruments. And that might sound easy, but in practice it is a bit more complicated, because not all of the synthesizers and instruments and effects boxes have all got the same kind of physical connections. You might have mono connections, you might have mini jack, you might have RCA, but also where they're situated can pose a problem, because you might not be be able to get round the rear and all that kind of thing. And that is where the Minibay comes in extremely handy. In order to get over that kind of challenge or problem or logistical difficulty, as it were, the Minibay allows you to connect up all of your inputs, say all of your instruments or your synthesizers, on to the A row. Then you connect all of your mixer inputs or the outputs from the patchbay onto the B row, and then you connect up your different effects boxes or hardware units onto the effects dedicated section. And that means that, let's say you wanted to run synthesizer 1 into the delay, rather than having to physically change the connection on the units themselves, you would simply patch between the relevant patch point on the Minibay. Equally, let's say you wanted to, I don't know, run the delay into the reverb or whatever it might be to experiment with different signal chains. Again, rather than having to change everything on the units and get tangled up in some kind of cable spaghetti, minijack, patchbay, sorted, easy, brilliant. Now that is one of the main benefits of using a patchbay like this, and there are different ways that you can implement this in your particular setup, but I was much more interested in the Minibay, or at least I was looking for a device like this for my analog video art setup. The reason for this is because if you know anything about analog video art, anytime you change any part of the signal flow, then you can get drastically different and much more interesting results. And that's particularly the case if you use different output devices, aka CRT televisions. So let's say you've got a standard signal flow of a video playing through a video enhancer effects box, and you play it through one television. Then that television might not look particularly great, but if you run it through a different television, it might look incredible. And so, as is the nature of this kind of analog experimentation process, you want to be able to change your signal flow quickly so you can try out all of those different possibilities. And unfortunately, even though there are these things you can get called distribution amplifiers or matrix switches for the world of analog video, they're getting increasingly hard to find in good condition. They often are limited in the number of inputs and outputs. They often need expensive controller devices, and the newer ones you can find are actually extremely expensive, something like 800 to 1,000 odd pounds, because they're broadcast quality units. And so my idea was, for the kind of video artists amongst us, wouldn't it be cool if we could have a patchbay? We could just change the signal flow, and the Minibay seems to do the job. In order to get the Minibay to work with my analog video art setup, what I've had to do is buy a whole load of fairly cheap but hopefully reliable 1/4" stereo TRS jack adapters that then split out into RCA or phono connections. And that means that I can connect up my composite video devices fairly easily. It does, again, look fairly ridiculous, and it was a wee bit of a squeeze getting them all in there on the rear, but it seems to have worked out okay, so yeah. Now obviously the Minibay hasn't been specifically designed for video. It's kind of a hacky alternative way that you could use it, and there might be challenges with impedance and all that kind of thing. However, I have managed to get it to work with my setup, and it's actually proven to be quite a useful device, particularly for live kind of video art performances where you want to use analog boxes and move between them on the fly without carrying this big fucking matrix switch everywhere. So that's another way that you could use something like this, and actually it is one that I'm going to be, I guess, recommending to people in the video art world to have a look at and see if it might fit their needs, as increasingly these distribution amplifiers and things kind of disappear. Now there are a few things that you should note about the Minibay before you rush out and buy one of these things. The first being that this is purely a signal routing box, in the sense that it is not a mixer, there's no faders or anything on there, and it is also, importantly, not a buffered multiple. It is a passive box, which means that it doesn't need any power, but because of that, if you're trying to split signals into multiple different places, much like if you're using a modular system, you'll know that if you don't use a buffered multiple in certain situations, your signal signal level will drop, it will degrade, and whilst that may not be a problem for certain kind of use cases, it certainly will be for others, and so don't expect to just be able to patch out indefinitely from this, because it's not powered, it's not a buffered multiple. The second thing that's worth saying is that the TRS jack connections can be a wee bit of a pain in the arse. I understand why they've done it, and it makes a lot of sense to keep it portable and give a lot of connections. However, it does mean that you're going to have to get insert cables or other similar adapters, and getting decent quality ones can add up to the cost and bulk of your setup fairly quickly. So be aware of that. It's not a killer, it doesn't kind of reduce the value really of the Minibay in any way, but it is something that you should factor into your budget or whatever when you're buying it, because not everybody has loads and loads of insert cables lying around. I know that I didn't anyway. The final thing that's worth noting is that DF Audio did say that there was a bit of an issue with some of the units when they were being sent out in terms of transit, because inside the connection had become loose between two parts of it. Fairly easy to fix. I mean, it's incredibly easy to fix. You just open up the thing like you would if you're going to change the dip switches and reseat the connectors. However, something to be aware of if you get one of these and it isn't quite working, it has kind of come loose, so be aware of that. Overall, I think the Minibay is a really incredibly cool wee thing. It's particularly cool actually to see this idea that lots of people have been talking about, you know, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have a mini jack patch bay, and have somebody actually bring it to life, because it's not often that you see that, especially with a wee independent manufacturer. So I genuinely wish them all the best, and I hope that this thing, the word about this thing, gets out to the people that are really interested in it. I can genuinely see how this would be really useful for people who are doing live DAW style performances with different bits of gear, who want to, let's say, change the effect on different instruments between different parts of, you know, the song or arrangement, or between, or, you know, between or across different songs, I guess I should say. And I think it really, it does fit that kind of gap in the market that was outstanding for quite a while. For me, I'm going to be using the Minibay for my live video art stuff. It makes switching between things so much easier, and I don't have to carry one of the big rack effects units. So thanks very much to DF Audio for sending it over. If you do have any additional questions, you can feel free to ask me. I'm sure Dudley will be kicking about in the comments somewhere. But if you've got any more technically in-depth questions, then perhaps you'd be better just watching Jorb's video and directing your queries to him, because I'm sure his explanation is much more lucid and probably comprehensive. For now, thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.